I pointed to the spot on the map where Volkov was hiding. Silas's obsession with the innocent flared. He was going to fight. And I couldn't just stand by. "Let me come with you," I insisted. "I'm your partner, Silas. Not a burden." He looked at me, torn between protection and trust. Finally, he nodded, a nod that shattered all his rules. "Fine, but you will stay in the car." I knew, in that moment, I had chosen him. I stepped into the armored car, feeling the coldness of the metal. Our dark love, now, was sealed by the willingness to step into hell together. I remember that fateful night vividly. The smell of mold from the dingy apartment mixed with the sharp fumes of heavy alcohol and cheap cigarettes. It wrapped around me like a grim prophecy. My family. Or rather, the hollow shell of a family shattered by debt, was standing on the precipice. My father, a man whose eyes once held pride, was now a trembling shadow, his thin hands clutching a bottle. My mother, her hair prematurely gray with worry, prayed silently, tears tracing paths down her gaunt cheeks. And I stood there, 25 years old, feeling the crushing weight of helplessness grinding my soul into fragments. The apartment door burst open. That violent sound still haunts me. 3 tall, heavily tattooed men entered like specters from hell. They didn't say much, just slammed those glaring crimson debt papers onto the table, the number on them enough to sink a small town. "The debt is due, Vance," one man growled, his eyes sweeping over me with distaste, pausing on my disheveled appearance, as if I were outdated merchandise. "Either pay in full, or your daughter will have to work it off." My heart stopped. The entire room plunged into a dead silence, broken only by my father's gasping breath and my mother's muffled sobs. I knew what I had to do. I'd prepared myself for the worst, accepting that my life would be crushed to buy my family's fragile survival. The self-disgust, knowing I was about to yield what was most precious, the extreme terror of a blurred future. It was a sharp blade scoring every nerve fiber. As a powerful man reached a brutal hand toward me, ready to drag me away, I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting. I waited for the pain, the shame, but what I received wasn't what I'd expected. A sudden, fierce crash ripped through the air, shaking the floor. The man who'd just touched my shoulder stumbled and fell, writhing on the dirty floor. I opened my eyes. Door was still ajar, but now a tall, colossal figure stood framed in the threshold. Silas Blackwood. That name, now, is bound to every beat of my heart, every breath I take. But in that defining moment, he was an alien, authoritative figure, stepping into my life like a dark god. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, the high-quality fabric emphasizing his tall, powerful build. The streetlights shone just enough to highlight his sharp jawline and his thick, pitch-black hair. His eyes? They were my obsession. Cold gray, like forged steel, they held a deadly stillness and an unshakable power. I had never seen a man radiate such intense presence. He walked slowly, without a sound, his eyes gliding over the 3 debt collectors as if they were insignificant insects. Silas's mere existence was enough to dominate the room. The 2 remaining men, previously aggressive, visibly shrank, their faces ashen. "What are you doing here?" Silas's voice was deep, commanding, like distant thunder. But underlying it was an icy chill that sent a cold current down my spine. The leader, though trying to appear stern, couldn't conceal his fear. The girl's debt. The Vance family. Silas cut him off. "How much?" The man awkwardly looked at the debt paper. Silas didn't wait. He pulled out a glossy, black crocodile skin wallet from his jacket, filled with thick, crisp stacks of green dollar bills. He threw them onto the table without a flicker of hesitation, like discarding trash. The money scattered, glinting in the dim light, 10 times the amount owed. Is that enough? He asked, his cold gray eyes still fixed on the man. This sum is enough for you to forget this address permanently, and to forget the name Vance. The man mumbled, gathering the cash, his greedy eyes alight, but the fear remained. They quickly scrambled away, leaving behind a chaotic mess and a heavy, suffocating silence. When the door slammed shut, my world seemed to slam shut in another way. I looked at Silas, the man who had just lifted an unbearable weight from my family's shoulders, yet simultaneously planted a new fear in my heart. He turned to me. His gaze seemed to penetrate my very soul, exploring every deepest, hidden corner. Alara Vance, he said, my name on his lips sounding strange, and so possessive. You owe me. My heart pounded. I was speechless. My parents, still frozen, dared not speak. They looked at Silas with a mixture of awe and gratitude. I have cleared all the debts for your family, the man continued, stepping closer, his breath carrying an expensive, potent, and strangely alluring scent that fanned my face. In return, you belong to me. My eyes widened. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. Belong to you? Silas leaned in slightly, his eyes darkening. Yes. You will live under my protection. You will lack nothing. Your family will be safe. No one will dare touch them again. In exchange, you must not love anyone else but me. The words were not a question. They were an order, a condition, a declaration of absolute, cold, uncompromising ownership. It was an invisible chain, wrapping tightly around me, binding me to this man. I found myself trembling uncontrollably. But I don't love you. A faint, almost invisible smirk touched his lips. Love is not what we are discussing right now, Alara. This is a contract. I save you from hell, and you devote your life to me. You will learn to love me. Or at least live as if you do. His tone lacked any softness, filled only with iron will and authority. I looked into his eyes, searching for a spark of humanity, a hint of compassion, but found only a bottomless, deep abyss. I knew I had no choice. Refusal meant throwing my family back into the pit of despair, perhaps in greater danger than before. Acceptance. Acceptance meant turning myself into a bird trapped in a golden cage, an expensive plaything in the hands of a man I barely knew. I agree, I whispered, my voice raw, choked with emotion. Every word spoken was a knife cutting into my heart, severing dreams, hopes of a free love, a normal life. Silas Blackwood nodded, his expression unchanged, as if he'd known my answer all along. He reached out, gently touching my cheek. His fingers were cold, yet sent a strange current down my spine. It wasn't a gesture of affection, but an affirmation of ownership, a brand deeply etched into my soul. Good, he said. Pack your things. You're leaving with me now. I turned to look at my parents, my eyes pleading for help, but they just lowered their heads, unable to face me. Their silence was more painful than any words. I had been sold. I had been traded. My life, Alara Vance's life, ended that night. And a new life, under the title of Silas Blackwood's property, began. I followed him out of the squalid apartment, not daring to look back. My steps were heavy, each one a farewell to the past. Outside, a sleek black Rolls-Royce waited, its headlights cutting through the night. Inside the car was a luxury I'd never imagined. Soft leather, ample space, the scent of rare wood, and something very Silas. During the long drive away from the city, I sat in silence, staring at the streetlights flashing past the window. My mind whirled with 1,000 questions. Who was Silas? Why did he do this? What did the condition, "You must not love anyone else but me," truly mean? Was it purely possessiveness, Or did it hide something even more terrifying, a sophisticated trap I couldn't see? The man next to me didn't utter a word. He only occasionally glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his deep eyes unreadable. His silence was more menacing than any threat. It created an enigmatic void, where all my fears were magnified. As the car sped onto the empty highway, I watched the city's skyscrapers recede, fading into the darkness. The initial panic slowly morphed into a cold numbness. I had accepted my fate, but deep inside, a small voice kept screaming. How will I live? I asked myself. What kind of person will I become in this golden cage? I turned to look at Silas. His face was still placid, like a statue carved from precious marble. He showed no remorse or worry. He was the master of a dark world, where contracts were sealed with blood and despair. And I, Alara Vance, had become a part of that world. I closed my eyes, trying to stop the tears. I reminded myself that my family was safe. That was the price. The price was my freedom, my heart. But was the salvation merely another, more luxurious prison? Life at Silas Blackwood's mansion was an entirely different world. From my cramped and dirty apartment, I was thrust into a magnificent, splendid castle, secluded on a private hill overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Every detail radiated overwhelming opulence. Antique marble statues, priceless oil paintings, shimmering crystal chandeliers, and thick Persian rugs indulging every step. The scent of lilies, sandalwood, and fresh sea air blended together, creating a jarring contrast with my past. I was given a private room, larger than my entire family's apartment combined. The balcony overlooked a meticulously kept garden and, beyond that, the boundless ocean. I had my own staff, a dedicated butler named Alfred, who ensured every need was met before I even spoke. But the luxury did nothing to quell my fear. On the contrary, it amplified the sense of imprisonment. This wasn't a home. It was a gilded cage, with invisible bars forged from its owner's absolute wealth and power. Every day was an internal struggle. Was I Alara Vance, or was I the property Silas Blackwood had purchased? The lavish meals, the designer clothes, the mansion's unsettling peace. All were constant reminders of the fateful contract. I wasn't allowed to leave the estate without his permission, and discreet bodyguards constantly monitored my every move. I was a specially cared for prisoner. Silas. The man rarely appeared before me. He was preoccupied with his mysterious work, long meetings in his closed study, unannounced trips, and phone calls in a low, authoritative voice. When he did appear, his presence filled the room, creating an atmosphere so tense I found it hard to breathe. I tried to avoid him, to avoid accidental touches, even to avoid eye contact. But he seemed to be everywhere. Sometimes, I caught his eyes watching me from a distance, cold and scrutinizing, like a predator observing its prey. I began to observe the man. I am a sensitive person, capable of seeing past surface appearances. I had once studied psychology, dreaming of becoming a counselor, someone who could help broken lives. Now, that skill became my only tool for self-preservation in Silas's world. I noticed Silas was a man of habits. He woke up at the same hour every morning, drank the same type of black coffee, and read the same international financial newspaper. He moved with chilling precision. Every gesture had a purpose, never redundant. He spoke little, but every word carried weight. He never smiled, at least not in front of me. His smile, if it appeared, was just a contemptuous sneer or an expression of dark satisfaction. But sometimes, I caught glimpses of something else. Once, while strolling in the garden, I saw him standing by his study window, his eyes gazing far out at the ocean. There was a strange stillness in that look, a profound sadness I couldn't name. Another time, I accidentally passed the living room and saw him watching a news report about a child abuse case. His face, usually cold, suddenly darkened, his jaw clenched. It was just a fleeting moment, but it sparked a question in me. Could there be another Silas beneath that stony exterior? A Silas haunted by pain, a past connected to injustice, To vulnerable people being hurt? Could that be the core motivation for his absolute protection? I began recording my observations in a small notebook, carefully hidden. I noted small details, how he clenched his fist during phone calls, the subtle shift in his voice when he spoke about a certain matter, the times he unconsciously touched an old scar on his wrist. It was my way of holding on to a piece of my sanity, a fragment of the old Alara Vance. One evening, Silas summoned me to his study. The room was vast, filled with books, the scent of leather, and papers. He sat behind a colossal mahogany desk, his eyes like pins, fixing me in place. "You've been here for nearly a month, Alara," he said, his voice even. "Have you gotten used to your new life?" I lifted my chin. "I'm trying." "Trying isn't enough," he replied, setting down his coffee cup. The small clinking sound felt like a thunderclap to me. "I didn't buy your effort. I bought your devotion, your presence, and your love." My heart pounded again. I hated the way he mentioned the word love so coldly. "I don't understand. What do you want me to do?" The man looked at me for a long moment, as if contemplating something. "I know about your past, Alara. You studied psychology. You have a knack for analyzing people." I was surprised. Had he investigated me that thoroughly? I nodded, trying to remain composed. "My world is complex," Silas continued. "It's riddled with traitors, schemes, and dark secrets. Sometimes, the smallest details can determine survival. I need someone who can see what others miss." I was stunned. He wanted me to work for him? To turn me into a mental weapon? "You will help me analyze potential partners, enemies. You will read files, listen to recordings, and tell me what you see. Not the numbers, the data, but the person behind them. Their fears, their desires, their weaknesses." A spark ignited in my mind. This was my skill. This was how I could become a partner, not just a possession. What if I can't do it? His eyes darkened. "You will. If you don't, you are of no value to me. And a woman with no value is easily forgotten." The threat was cold and sharp. I knew he wasn't joking. I nodded. "I understand." From that day on, my life changed. Silas began giving me files, recordings. I spent hours in my small workspace, researching, analyzing, taking notes. I gradually understood a part of Silas's world, a clandestine financial empire operating under a legitimate facade, yet rife with shady deals and fierce power struggles. I realized he wasn't just a wealthy businessman, but a mob boss, an absolute power holder in the underworld. In the course of my work, I discovered unwritten rules in Silas's world. There were boundaries that must not be crossed, secrets that must not be revealed. But I also witnessed him breaking those rules. For me. Once, I uncovered a small detail in an opponent's file, a link between him and an organization that exploited women in Eastern Europe. I pointed out that this weakness could be exploited to threaten his family. Silas listened intently. A few days later, I overheard a conversation between him and Alfred. "That bastard crossed the line," the man's voice echoed, cold and full of rage. "He dared to touch the innocent. Destroy everything he has. Make sure he can never harm anyone again." I knew he was talking about the opponent I'd analyzed, and I knew that in Silas's world, destroy everything didn't just mean financially. That was the first time I saw his profound anger, a rage not for personal gain, but against an injustice, a moral violation he wouldn't tolerate. It made me wonder about his past, about his obsession with abused women. He protected me. Perhaps not just because of the contract, but because he saw in me a victim, someone who needed shelter. During another work session, I accidentally spilled coffee on a stack of classified documents. I panicked, thinking I would face his fury. But Silas only looked at me, without a word of reprimand. He cleaned it up himself, then gently took the documents from my hands. "It's all right," he said, his voice surprisingly warm. "Be more careful next time." It was a small moment, but it shook me. Gentleness. From a man like Silas Blackwood? Gradually, I began to realize another facet of his possession. It wasn't just power, it was protection. He cared about my sleep, my meals. He ensured I was absolutely safe, that not a single hair on my head was harmed. He was a solid wall, shielding me from all danger. That security. It felt like a drug. I both feared and craved it, and I despised myself for it. How could I feel safe in the arms of a man who had bought me, who had stripped me of my freedom? How could I feel a flicker of attraction to this cold, ruthless man? That internal conflict tormented me every night. I lay on the soft bed, looking out at the starry night sky, wondering if I was slowly losing my own conscience. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to go down to the library. Silas was there, reading under a dim light. When I entered, he looked up. His eyes showed no surprise, as if he knew I would come. "Can't sleep, Ilara?" he asked, his voice low. I shook my head. I just wanted to read." The man motioned to the chair opposite him. I sat down, feeling a strange tension. He didn't speak, just continued reading. The silence between us was no longer entirely frightening, but mixed with a hint of understanding, a tacit acceptance. After a long while, he put the book down. "The outside world is brutal, Ilara. I've seen too much evil. Too many people have paid with their lives just because of their weakness." I listened, noticing the unusual, somewhat heavy tone of his voice. "I once saw a little girl." "Abandoned," Silas continued, his eyes distant, not focused on me. "Just because her parents made a mistake. She had to endure things no one should." He paused, as if lost in a painful memory. It was the first time he had revealed a piece of his past, a deep scar. I felt the obsession, the pain he had suffered, which had shaped the man he was today. "I promised myself," Silas said, his voice hardening. "I would never let that happen again. Never let the innocent suffer for the mistakes of others." I looked at him and suddenly understood something. He wasn't just a possessor. He was a protector, in his own way. A ruthless, yet genuine, protector. He protected me, not just because of the contract, but because I represented a vulnerability he had sworn to shield. "Is that why you saved me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The man turned back to me, his cold gray eyes searching mine for something. "Perhaps. Or perhaps. You have become a part of me, Ilara. A part I can't afford to lose." That language of possession, now, wasn't entirely terrifying. It carried an indescribable complexity. I was torn between the feeling of being protected and the fear of losing myself. I craved the safety he offered, but I also feared the price. But could I truly belong to a man whose protection I craved, yet whose dark secrets I feared? My life under Silas's protection continued in a fragile balance. I accepted my role, working for the man, using my skills to help him navigate his underworld. My psychological analyses became sharper, helping him see through his rival's plots and intentions. He respected my intellect, which made me feel less like a mere object. A strange, twisted bond was slowly forming between us. However, the threat from the outside world never truly vanished. Fear always lingered, like an invisible ghost. And then, the day I feared most arrived. I was in my workspace, analyzing a complex financial file, when Alfred rushed in, his face pale. "Miss Ilara, something's happened." My heart hammered. "What is it?" "Your relatives. Someone broke into their apartment. Your parents have been moved to a secure location, but..." Alfred paused, swallowing hard. "They left a message. A message." For you. I felt the blood in my veins freeze. The old fear surged, stronger than ever. They had found me. Or, at least, they had found my weakness. I ran to Silas's study, where he was standing by the window, looking out at the sea, his back to me. His composure in that moment only amplified my panic. "Silas!" I called out, my voice trembling. "My family." "Someone attacked them." The man turned around. His face was calm, but his cold gray eyes suddenly darkened, deep as an abyss. "I know," he said, his voice cold, deadly. It was a warning. A warning? I almost screamed. A warning for what? Who did this? Silas walked toward me, his steps firm, authoritative. An old enemy of mine. A man named Viktor Volkov. He was once my partner, but betrayed me and committed unforgivable crimes. He knows you are my weakness. Viktor Volkov. That name had come up in some of the files I'd analyzed. A brutal man, conscienceless, involved in human trafficking and other illicit activities. And he had targeted me. What does he want? I asked, feeling my body shake uncontrollably. He wants me to abandon a crucial deal, to sacrifice my power, Silas replied. In exchange for your safety. He believes you are the only thing I can't afford to lose. Silas's words, though cold, carried a profound meaning. He believed I was his weakness, the one thing he couldn't trade. That meant I had become incredibly important in this man's life. So what will you do? I asked, filled with panic but also a sense of anticipation, waiting for his reaction, his protection. Silas looked at me, his gaze like bullets piercing my soul. You are mine, Ilara, he said, his voice low, full of possession. No one is allowed to touch what is mine. No one is allowed to threaten what is mine. He has made a fatal mistake. In that instant, I saw the fury erupt in his cold gray eyes. It wasn't ordinary anger, but a violent, primal rage, the fury of a predator whose territory has been violated. Alfred, Silas turned to the butler, his voice commanding. Triple the security. Ensure every corner of the estate is protected. Contact our team. I want Volkov found. He will pay for his foolishness. The word our in Silas's statement startled me. I had become a part of him, a part of his war. The next 2 days were intensely stressful. The air in the mansion was thick. Bodyguards moved everywhere, their footsteps echoing in the large corridors. I tried to work, to focus on the files, but my mind constantly returned to Viktor Volkov, to Silas, and to the price I had paid to be here. On the evening of the third day, things unfolded quickly. I was in the library, trying to read to distract myself from fear, when I suddenly heard the blare of sirens in the distance, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire ripping through the night. The mansion instantly became a battleground. I jumped up in panic. My heart hammered like a drum. This was it. They had come. I heard rapid footsteps, the guards shouting, the shattering of glass. Survival instinct told me to find a safe hiding spot. I ran toward the stairs, but just then, a tall figure appeared, blocking my way. It was Silas. He was in black, but far from his usual elegant self. His shirt was torn on one side, revealing his muscular chest. In his hand was a handgun, the cold metal reflecting the light. His eyes blazed with a dark fire, full of power and fury. He was a god of war, ready to destroy anything in his path. Ilara! He growled, his voice a command. Stay put. Don't leave this room. But I couldn't. I saw a group of armed men advancing from the main entrance. What? What are you going to do? Silas didn't answer. He just looked at me intensely, as if trying to imprint my image onto his memory. Then he turned, launching himself straight into the enemy. I stood frozen, witnessing the terrifying scene. Silas moved like lightning, graceful as a phantom. He was ruthless, uncompromising. Gunshots echoed, shouts, the sound of breaking bones. Silas was a destruction machine, a storm of violence. He took down one man after another, his eyes unwavering, filled only with grim determination and rage. Blood splattered onto the walls, onto the floor. The smell of gunpowder and fresh blood assaulted my nose, making me nauseous. I was horrified by the spectacle, horrified by the brutality of the man to whom I had entrusted my fate. But at the same time, in a deep corner of my soul, I felt a strange admiration. He was fighting for me. He was protecting me, at all costs, with his very life. In the chaos, a mercenary lunged toward me, his gun aimed directly at my head. My heart stopped. I closed my eyes, thinking this was the end. But then, a dull sound echoed. When I opened my eyes, the mercenary had collapsed to the floor. Silas stood behind him, the gun still smoking. He had saved me. Again, Silas tossed the gun aside, rushing to my side. He pulled me into a tight embrace, his arms so strong I thought my ribs might break. His breath was ragged, and I felt his heart pounding fiercely against my chest. The scent of blood, sweat, and something intensely masculine enveloped me. "You're safe, Alara," he whispered, his voice hoarse, full of relief and a hint of anger. "No one can harm you." I trembled in his arms. The fear was still present, but now it mingled with a strange sense of calm. I looked up at him. His face was smeared with dirt, and a small streak of blood was on his temple. But his eyes? They looked at me with an intensity I'd never seen before. He leaned down. His lips met mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss, but a fierce, passionate kiss, full of possession and longing. He kissed me as if wanting to devour me, to confirm my presence in his life. I didn't resist. In his arms, amidst the chaotic scene of death and destruction, I felt a bizarre impulse, a primal response. I kissed him back, with all my fear, all my longing, and all the turmoil in my soul. The kiss lasted, tasting of blood and tears. It was a declaration, not just from him, but from me too. When we pulled apart, Silas gently stroked my hair, his eyes still burning. "You are mine, Alara," he whispered, his voice low, full of affirmation. "No one is allowed to have you. No one is allowed to love you. Your heart, your body, all of it belongs to me." He held me tight, like a priceless treasure he had bled to protect. He turned his face away, looking at the wreckage around us. "Viktor Volkov will pay. He will pay for daring to touch my property. My most precious property." His words were both a threat and a declaration of love, in his own dark way. I looked at him, the man who was both my protector and my captor. I knew that night, a part of me died, and another part was born. A part of me had accepted fate, accepted that this love, though forbidden and terrifying, was the only place I felt safe. In his arms, I realized I was no longer afraid of that dark protection. But I was afraid of myself for finding safety within it. After that bloody battle, Silas's mansion was steeped in a gloomy, heavy atmosphere. The smell of gunpowder and blood still lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the brutality of the world I had stepped into. Silas practically vanished. He spent hours in his study, directing the hunt for Viktor Volkov. I felt his anger and determination, an iron will that nothing could shake. I returned to my work, but everything was different. I was no longer a distant observer. I had witnessed the cruelty, the ever-present danger firsthand. I knew I was part of this war, and my safety was tied to Silas's survival. I used all my analytical skills, digging deep into the information about Volkov, trying to find a weakness, an opening. The days of waiting dragged on like centuries. Every strange noise, every gust of wind through the window startled me. I slept poorly, nightmares of gunfire and the brutal faces of the attackers haunting me. I wondered if I was slowly losing the innocence, the naivety of the old Alara Vance. Or was I transforming into something else, a hardened woman, adapted to the darkness? One afternoon, as I was examining a complex topographical map of a remote area where Volkov might be hiding, Silas entered. He gave no warning, and his appearance always unnerved me. His face was still cold, but fatigue was etched beneath his eyes. "Have you found anything, Alara?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I pointed to a spot on the map. "This area, it has an old, abandoned orphanage, but it's in a strategic location, hard to access. Volkov might use it as a base. He always exploits places others overlook." The man looked at the spot I pointed to, a sharp glint in his eyes. "An orphanage." His voice softened, a clear obsession appearing in his words. He always knows how to cut deep into old scars. I looked at him. "What do you think he'll do?" Silas clenched his hand. "He'll try to lure me there. He'll use children, or anything he perceives as my weakness to force me out." In that moment, I understood his deepest fear. It was the fear of innocent people being hurt, exploited, especially children and women. That's why he became such a ruthless protector. "Are you going?" I asked, my voice small. Silas turned to look at me, his gaze as firm as stone. "I will go. I will never let him harm anyone again." It was a declaration, a promise not only to me, but to his own conscience, to his own haunted past. I felt a strange impulse. "Let me come with you." Silas looked at me, his eyes full of surprise. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "I can help," I insisted. "I understand how he thinks. I can see things you don't. I am your partner, Silas. Not a burden." He looked at me for a long time, considering. I knew this was a rule he never thought he'd break, never to put the one he protected in harm's way. But I was no longer a weak woman needing complete shelter. I had changed. Finally, Silas nodded. "Fine. But you will stay in the car, unmoving. You will not leave my protection for a second." That nod was another confirmation of our relationship. I wasn't just property. I was a partner. We set out at dawn, when the fog still covered the hill. Silas brought an elite team of heavily armed bodyguards. I sat in the back of the armored car, my heart pounding in my chest. The gloom of the early morning, the tense faces of the men around us. All signaled a fierce battle ahead. As we approached the abandoned orphanage, the air grew heavier than ever. It was a dilapidated, moss-covered building, hidden deep within the dense forest. The desolate scene only increased the chill. Silas gave orders to his team. He stepped out of the car, rifle slung over his shoulder, his sharp eyes scanning every corner of the woods. I sat in the car, glued to his every movement. He was a phantom among the trees, moving with frightening composure and decisiveness. The confrontation didn't happen immediately. Silas wasn't rushing. He knew Volkov was waiting. He was a brilliant strategist, always luring his enemies into their own traps. And then the gunfire erupted, ripping through the morning silence. I flinched. Automatic weapon fire, echoing shouts. I saw Silas and his team launch into battle. He was the eye of the storm, commanding, fighting, never flinching. I tried to follow him through binoculars, praying silently. Then I saw something. From a hidden position, a flash of light. A sniper. I had seen him in Volkov's file, a notorious marksman. He was aiming at Silas. "Silas!" "Sniper!" I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the gunfire and explosions. I couldn't stay put any longer. I had to do something. Silas had put me in danger to trust me, to have me as his partner. I couldn't just sit and watch him get hurt. Ignoring his orders, I opened the car door. I dashed out, running toward him, trying to get his attention, I didn't know what I would do. I just knew I couldn't let him die. Just then, I heard a sharp bang. Silas collapsed. My heart stopped. The world spun. Silas! I shrieked, rushing to his side. He lay on the ground, a patch of bright red blood quickly spreading on his shoulder. His face was contorted in pain, but his eyes were fixed on me. Elara. I told you. No! I cut him off. You're hurt. His team quickly surrounded us, forming a shield. The battle raged on, but now there was a new ferocity in their actions. Silas was wounded, and that was a declaration of war. I tried to bandage his wound with my handkerchief. The blood kept flowing. He gripped my hand tightly, his eyes searching mine for something. Volkov. He's still out there. He won't give up. Somehow, I could sense his location. I had studied him too closely. In the old church, I said, pointing toward a ruined building. In the bell tower. He always favors high, easily observable positions. Silas looked at me, his eyes full of trust. All right, he said, his voice hoarse. Alfred. Listen to Elara. And then, despite his injury, Silas stood up. He leaned on me slightly, but his eyes were full of resolve. We're ending this. In that moment, I felt a violent romance envelop us. His love wasn't gentle words. It was the readiness to sacrifice everything to protect me. That sacrifice. It was stronger than any fear I had ever felt. Silas and I, along with Alfred and a few guards, advanced into the old church. The air inside was cold and gloomy, full of long shadows. We heard Volkov's sneering laugh from above. Silas Blackwood, his voice echoed, full of mockery. You finally came, and you brought the girl with you. You've certainly grown weak. Silas didn't reply. He just looked up at the bell tower, his eyes like daggers. He signaled to me. I knew what to do. I had analyzed Volkov. I knew what could distract him. You think you've won, Volkov? I shouted, my voice echoing in the church. You don't understand Silas. He never gives up, and he will never let scum like you hurt anyone again. My words startled Volkov. He showed himself, looking down from the bell tower, his face contorted with anger. Shut up, you bitch. In the moment of his distraction, Silas signaled. Alfred and the others returned fire. Silas, despite his injury, also fired up. He moved like lightning, dodging Volkov's shots. The fight in the old church was a display of pure violence. Silas fought with all his might, with ultimate rage. He wasn't just fighting for me, but for all the victims Volkov had harmed. Finally, Silas confronted Volkov in the bell tower. A fierce hand-to-hand fight ensued. Silas was injured, but he was stronger, more determined. He knocked Volkov down, his hand gripping his neck. You will never harm anyone again, Silas snarled, his eyes burning. I swear it. I stood at the base of the tower, watching the scene, a fierce turmoil inside me. Silas was brutal, but he was also my protector, the one who sacrificed for me. Seeing the wounds on his body, I knew this love was a curse I never wanted to break. The battle in the old church ended. Viktor Volkov was defeated, no longer a threat, but the cost was heavy. Silas was severely wounded. The bullet wound on his shoulder bled profusely, and he had multiple cuts and bruises all over his body. When he descended from the bell tower, he nearly collapsed into my arms. Are you okay? I asked, my voice choked, tears streaming down my cheeks. I had been utterly terrified. The man looked at me, a pale smile appearing on his lips, the first time I'd seen such a smile, full of weakness and relief. I'm fine. Elara, you are safe. That was all he cared about. My safety. He had sacrificed himself to protect me, to protect other innocent people. We brought Silas back to the mansion. He received immediate medical care. The following days were filled with worry and fear. I didn't leave his bedside, constantly attending to him, wiping his sweat, changing his bandages. In his moments of delirium, he often called my name or mumbled vaguely about a little girl, a damaged woman. I knew that painful past was deeply ingrained in his mind, and it was the motivation behind everything he did. As Silas slowly recovered, a subtle change occurred between us. His cold, ruthless shell seemed to have partially broken. He was still the powerful man, but there was a newfound gentleness in the way he looked at me, in the way he touched me. It was no longer pure possession, but mixed with a hint of genuine love, a love tempered by blood and tears. One afternoon, as the golden sunset streamed through the window, Silas awoke. He saw me asleep by his bed, my hand tightly holding his. He gently stroked my hair, a tender gesture I hadn't seen before. I woke up. "You're awake?" Silas nodded, his eyes surprisingly warm. "You didn't leave?" "How could I leave?" I said, tears welling up again. "You saved me. You fought for me." He smiled, a weak but sincere smile. "I broke all my rules for you, Alara. I put you in danger. I've done so many wrongs." "You saved me from hell, Silas," I countered. "You gave me a new life. Twisted as it is, it's mine." He looked at me for a long time. "I want you to be free, Alara. Free from my world. Free from this contract." My heart pounded again. Freedom? I had longed for it so much. But now, as it was offered to me, I felt a strange fear. How could I leave this man, who had become an indispensable part of my life? "I want you to be happy," Silas continued, his voice low, full of exhaustion but also love. "A normal life, without darkness, without danger. You deserve it." I shook my head. "I can't leave you. I fell in love with you, Silas." The words left my lips, natural as breath. It was a painful truth, a forbidden love, but it was real. I loved this man, loved both the darkness and the light within him, loved both his ruthlessness and his absolute protection. Silas looked at me, his eyes gleaming with a ray of hope and a hint of acceptance of fate. "I love you too, Alara," he whispered, his voice so weak I barely heard it. "I love you more than anything in this world. And because of that, I will set you free." He gripped my hand tightly. I felt his breathing become shallower, weaker. The sunset faded, painting the room with a blood-red hue. "I've prepared everything," Silas said, his voice growing fainter. "All my assets, everything I have, is yours. You will never have to worry about anything again. You will have a new life. A life you deserve." My tears flowed again. "No, you can't leave me." He smiled faintly. I've atoned for my sins, Alara. I protected you. That's all I wanted." I leaned down, hugging him tightly, hearing his weak heartbeat in his chest. His scent, the scent I had learned to love, now carried an indescribable pain. Live happily, Alara," Silas whispered, his voice so faint it was just a breeze. "Live for both of us. Live a life full of light and love." And then his heart stopped beating. His hand loosened its grip on mine. His breath was gone. Silas Blackwood was gone. He chose to sacrifice himself to give me the freedom I longed for, and also to atone for all the mistakes, the sins he had committed in his dark life. It was a tragic ending, yet it carried a strange peace. He had found his serenity. I cried a lot. The pain of loss crushed my soul. But along with the pain there was a deep understanding. Silas loved me, in his own way. A dark, possessive love, but genuine and absolute. A few months later, I discovered I was pregnant. It was Silas's child. A seed of the future, a symbol of our forbidden yet intense love. I decided to leave Silas's mansion, taking our child to a quieter place, a place where I could raise our child in the light, without the shadows of the underworld. I used the assets Silas left behind to establish a charity fund, helping women and children who are victims of violence. It was my way of continuing his legacy, continuing the mission to protect the vulnerable he had once pursued, in a different, more humane way. Every sunset, I often sit by the window, looking out at the vast ocean. I remember Silas, his cold gray eyes, his ruthless protection, and his absolute love. He brought me to hell, but he also saved me from it. He took away my freedom, but he also gave me a new life, a future full of hope. As the warm sunlight streams through the window, I know he is still here, in the beat of my heart, and in every ray of hope he restored to this life.